Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at something that I think is going to be super relevant to a lot of our listeners out there,
Yeah.
especially our UPSC aspirants.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about the disposal of hazardous waste from the Union Carbide factory in Bhopal.
Yeah.
And this is something that's, not just history. It's a topic with major implications for, things like environmental science, public health, and law.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, all potential fodder for your mains exam and
Yeah.
maybe even, a tricky prelims question or two, who knows?
Absolutely. And this isn't just something theoretical. This
Right.
is happening right now. This is something that any aspiring civil servant should be aware of. And
Yeah, and we're pulling our insights from recent articles in the Hindustan Times and the BBC. So,
right.
it's the latest news.
Exactly.
All right, so are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. I'm ready.
Okay, cool. So let's start with just the facts on the ground. Just this month, authorities began the process of moving 358 tons of hazardous waste from that old Union Carbide site.
Right.
To put that in perspective, that's like moving 10 Boeing 747s
Yeah.
full of this toxic material.
It's a massive undertaking, and it's taken a long time to get to this point.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking almost 40 years.
Yeah, 40 years to get to this point. I mean, after the Bhopal gas disaster, with over 4,000 deaths, countless injuries.
Yeah, it's a long time coming.
Absolutely. And this waste, primarily leftover ingredients from, fertilizer production, it's just been sitting there untreated all these years.
Wow.
And finally, the Madhya Pradesh High Court stepped in and said, okay, there's a deadline. This needs to be taken care of.
So where are they taking all this hazardous waste? I can't imagine it's easy to find a place that can handle that kind of material.
Well, you're right. It's about 250 kilometers away to the Pithampur industrial area.
Okay.
And the plan is to incinerate it at a facility called a treatment, storage, and disposal facility.
TSDF?
Right, to TSDF.
Incineration. I mean, I can only imagine what the people who live near that Pithampur area
Yeah.
are thinking about that.
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of concerns about that.
Yeah, I bet.
And it really raises a crucial question. How do we balance this need to dispose of this hazardous waste with the risks, the potential risks to the environment, to public health?
It's like a real-life ethics problem.
Right out of the UPSC exam.
Yeah.
It really is. It highlights, the real challenges that policymakers have to face.
So what are we looking at here? What are the arguments on each side?
Well, on the one hand, this waste has been sitting there for decades.
Right.
It's a potential environmental threat all on its own, just sitting there.
Sure.
Incineration. It's a common method for dealing with hazardous waste,
Okay.
and it can be effective at destroying these harmful substances.
Yeah.
But then again, there are really legitimate concerns
Right.
about air quality and what about groundwater contamination from the ash?
Oh, yeah. You don't want that stuff getting in the water supply.
No, absolutely not.
Are there any other methods of disposal that they considered?
There are, and we'll get into that more detail
Yeah.
a little bit later in our deep dive. But for now, let's just focus on this decision to use incineration.
All right. So why Pithampur? Why this facility?
Well, Pithampur is actually home to the only TSDF in Madhya Pradesh that can handle the specific type of hazardous waste.
Okay.
The facility has a landfill and an incinerator,
Okay.
and it's been approved, by the Supreme Court and the Central Pollution Control Board,
The CPCB.
the CPCB, that's right.
But even with all his approvals, I'm sure there's a lot of skepticism,
Oh, yeah,
given the history of Bhopal.
absolutely.
What are they doing to address that and make sure everything's transparent?
Well, transparency is crucial in a situation like this. And to their credit, the authorities are doing some things to address these public concerns. They've been conducting tests, they've been monitoring the environment around the Pithampur site, and they're releasing that data
Okay.
to the public.
Yeah. But, I mean, data's one thing. Is there anything else they're doing to engage with the public and make them feel like they're a part of this process?
Well, they're taking a very cautious approach to the incineration itself.
Okay.
They're doing a trial run first.
Okay.
Using just a small amount of waste just to make sure everything's working right and the emissions are within acceptable limits.
That sounds like a good idea. How much waste are we talking for this trial run?
Just 90 kilograms.
Wow, that's tiny.
Yeah, it's a tiny amount compared to the 358 tons they eventually need to dispose of, but it's an important first step.
Of course.
And they'll be monitoring emissions, things like dioxins and furans, which are very hazardous
Right.
byproducts of incineration.
So it's data-driven, but it's also, safety and transparency are at the forefront.
Right.
But none of that matters if the public doesn't trust the process.
You're right.
So how are they building that trust?
Well, one of the things they're doing is a public awareness campaign.
Okay.
They're training a bunch of people, including science teachers, professors, government officials, to act as liaisons to the community.
So they can explain what's going on.
Yeah, explain the science behind the process.
Okay.
Address concerns, provide accurate information.
So it's not just about, the data. It's about having people they can actually talk to.
Exactly. It's about building trust and understanding through engagement and clear communication.
That's really cool. I like that.
It's a good step.
Yeah.
And the next court hearing is in February.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll see how things progress from there.
We'll see what happens.
All right, so we've laid out kind of the basics here.
Yeah.
But I think there's so much more to unpack.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Speaking of the legal side of things.
Right.
This whole situation seems like a perfect example of the kind of complex issue that our UPSC aspirants might see on their mains exam.
Oh, absolutely. It touches on so many different areas. Environmental regulations, public health disaster management, legal frameworks.
The role of the judiciary.
Absolutely.
Like a real-life case study,
It really is.
So from a, UPSC perspective, let's break this down a little bit. What are some of the, key legal precedents that govern this kind of hazardous waste disposal in India?
Well, there are a number of laws and regulations in place,
Right.
including the Hazardous Waste Management, Handling, and Transboundary Movement Rules of 2016, and then there were amendments in 2022.
Okay.
And these rules lay out specific procedures for everything handling, disposing of hazardous waste.
And I'm guessing the Bhopal Gas Tragedy itself
Oh, yeah.
probably led to some changes in those regulations.
Oh, absolutely. It was a wake-up call for
Oh,
India in terms of industrial safety, environmental regulations.
Yeah.
It led to changes in existing laws, the introduction of new legislation like the Environment Protection Act of 1986.
So for our UPSC students out there, it's not just about knowing the current laws, it's about understanding the historical context
Absolutely.
that led to them.
Right.
So going back to the Pithampur TSDF and the incineration,
Yeah,
they're planning another trial run before they actually do the full disposal.
that's right.
And we talked about that earlier, starting with a small amount of waste.
Right.
But why 90 kilograms? Is there a specific reason for that number?
There is. That amount was calculated based on the capacity of the incinerator.
Okay.
And they need to generate enough data to assess emissions accurately.
Make sure they're getting good readings?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about finding that right balance,
Yep. Okay.
getting enough information while also minimizing the risk during the trial phase.
So it's not just a random number they pulled out of a hat.
No.
What happens if the emissions from this trial run are too high?
Well, they have a backup plan.
Okay.
If the emissions are too high, they'll adjust. They might reduce the batch size for incineration,
Okay.
which could extend the whole process from 3 months to 9 months.
So it's really interesting because on one hand, it's like this super cautious approach.
Right.
But it also kind of highlights that incineration isn't perfect.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
It has its own challenges.
It's not a perfect solution, and it brings us back to that question we touched on earlier.
About alternative methods.
What are the alternatives?
Yeah. Are there things that are more environmentally friendly?
Yeah.
Less risky?
Right.
And this is the kind of comparative analysis I feel like UPSC examiners just eat up.
Oh, they love it.
They love it.
So let's talk about some alternatives.
Yeah.
One method that's gaining some traction is bioremediation.
Bioremediation.
Yeah, this uses microorganisms like bacteria and fungi
Interesting.
to break down those hazardous substances into less harmful compounds.
So it's like using nature's own cleanup crew.
That's a great way to put it.
But it can't be the solution for everything, right?
You're right. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It works best for certain types of organic waste,
Okay.
and it can be a little bit slower than incineration,
Makes sense.
and it requires specific conditions to be effective.
So it's a tool in the toolbox, but not a magic bullet.
Right.
What about other alternatives? Are there any like cutting edge things on the horizon?
There are some exciting developments.
Okay.
One that's generating a lot of buzz is plasma gasification.
Plasma gasification.
Yeah.
I mean, did you break that down for
Yeah. So imagine like a superheated torch that can reach temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun.
That's hot.
That's plasma, and it can break down pretty much any material,
Wow.
including hazardous waste, into its basic molecular components.
So what happens to the waste after it's been, plasma torched?
Well, the cool thing is it doesn't just destroy it.
Okay.
It can also turn it into valuable resources.
Well,
The process produces something called syngas,
Syngas.
which can be used for electricity or even as a feedstock for chemicals and fuels.
So you're telling me we can turn this hazardous waste into something useful?
Potentially, yes.
That's amazing.
It's a really promising technology.
That sounds like the future.
It could be.
So it's not just about disposal, it's about, creating something new.
And that's a key takeaway for our UPSC listeners.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding the problems, but it's about being able to identify and evaluate these potential solutions.
Finding those creative solutions.
Exactly. The UPSC is looking for candidates who can think critically and creatively about these complex challenges.
So they want to see that you're aware of these new technologies and, what impact they could have.
Absolutely.
But even with all this amazing technology, it can't always be the most practical solution, right?
That's true, especially in a developing country like India.
Yeah, cost is a big factor.
Absolutely.
So what about simpler things?
Right.
Can we do things to minimize the amount of waste that's generated in the first place?
Absolutely. Reducing waste at the source, that's always the most effective approach.
So, what kind of things can we do there? I feel like that's something that would be really helpful for our listeners who might get asked about, solutions to this kind of problem.
Absolutely. Well, one example is promoting industrial processes
Right.
that are inherently less polluting or generate less hazardous waste in the first place.
So making things cleaner from the start.
Exactly, and encouraging industries to adopt what we call closed-loop systems,
Closed loop systems.
where the waste from one process becomes the raw material for another.
So it's like that circular economy we were talking about.
Exactly.
Turning waste into a resource.
Exactly.
What about recycling? Can we recycle hazardous waste?
Absolutely. There are ways to do that, like recovering metals from electronic waste or reusing solvents in industrial processes.
Okay.
And new recycling technologies are being developed all the time.
So it seems like we're moving away from that old out of sight, out of mind mentality to something more sustainable.
It's about finding solutions that not only protect human health and the environment, but are also economically viable and socially responsible.
And that brings me to something I wanted to touch on. We've talked a lot about the technical side of things, the legal side,
Right.
but there's a human element to this story too.
Oh, absolutely. We can't forget about the people who are directly impacted by all of this.
Yeah, the people in Bhopal have been through so much already.
Absolutely.
And now they're dealing with this uncertainty of this waste being, transported and incinerated near their homes.
It's a difficult situation.
It's a reminder that these aren't just, policy issues. They affect real people.
They have real-world consequences for people's lives, their health, their livelihoods.
Absolutely. And I think for UPSC aspirants, that's an important thing to remember
Absolutely.
to show that understanding of the human cost
Yeah.
of all of this.
The UPSC is looking for leaders who are not only competent,
Right.
but also compassionate and socially aware.
Yeah. So it's about going beyond those technical solutions and thinking about the social and ethical implications.
Finding solutions that are both effective and just
Well
done. So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's just step back for a second and think about the bigger picture of the Bhopal gas tragedy and the challenges related to hazardous waste.
This disaster wasn't just a local event. It had a global impact.
Absolutely. It raised awareness about the potential dangers of industrial accidents and the need for stronger environmental regulations worldwide.
Yeah, it really made people stop and think.
It did. Bhopal became a symbol
Right.
of the consequences of industrial negligence
Yeah.
and really the need to prioritize human health and environmental protection over corporate profits.
And it also brought up these really tough ethical questions about, multinational corporations operating in developing countries.
Absolutely.
And how do you ensure accountability when something like this happens?
Those are questions that we're still grappling with today.
Yeah, it's not a simple answer.
Not at all, as we try to deal with this legacy of industrial pollution and find sustainable and ethical practices in this globalized world.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
I think this whole episode has been such a, stark reminder of the importance of being vigilant.
Yeah.
Having responsible governance and learning from our mistakes.
We have to learn from the past so we can prevent future tragedies.
Exactly. We have to remember Bhopal and the countless lives that were affected.
It's a call to action for all of us to work towards a safer, more just, and sustainable future.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll conclude this part of our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. It's really amazing to me how a single event like the Bhopal gas tragedy can have such a ripple effect, impacting policy technology even just the way we think about things as a society.
It really highlights that these environmental issues, they're not just about the science or the regulations, they're about people.
Yeah.
Real people's lives are affected by this.
And for our UPSC aspirants out there,
Yeah.
that's something super important to remember. The exam, it's not just about, memorizing facts. It's about showing that you understand these complex issues.
You got it. The UPSC, they're looking for people who can think, critically connect the dots, and come up with solutions
Right.
that work on multiple levels.
So let's talk about solutions. We, gone over some of the challenges with hazardous waste disposal,
Yeah.
especially in Bhopal. But how do we move forward?
Huh.
What are some of the things that, give us hope of the future?
Well, there's no magic bullet, but there are a lot of cool developments out there. We've talked about some of them.
Right.
Like bioremediation and plasma gasification.
Yeah.
These technologies are really interesting. They offer these new possibilities for dealing with hazardous waste.
In a way that's better for the environment.
Mm-hmm.
But technology is only part of the picture, right?
Of course, technology is great, but it needs to go hand in hand with good policy
Right.
and a commitment to doing things the right way. And that's where governments and international cooperation come in.
So what are some of those, key policy initiatives that are shaping the future of hazardous waste management? What should our UPSC folks be paying attention to?
One big one is this idea of extended producer responsibility.
Extended producer responsibility.
Yeah, basically it means that the companies that make these products, they're responsible for what happens to them, even after they're used.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about getting rid of the waste. It's about preventing it in the first place.
You got it.
I like that.
Another trend is this push for a circular economy.
We've talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, basically it's about designing products and processes
Right.
in a way that minimizes waste and makes the most of the resources we have.
Like closing the loop.
Exactly, turning waste into something valuable.
That's awesome. And this circular economy,
Uh,
it's not just an idea. It's actually happening, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The European Union, for example, they have these ambitious plans to move towards a circular economy.
So for our listeners who are, studying for the UPSC, this is something you should really dig into.
Research the circular economy, understand how it works.
Yeah.
What are the pros and cons?
Because it's that kind of forward thinking
Exactly.
that I think the UPSC is looking for.
They want people who can identify solutions.
Right. Not just point out the problem.
Yeah, remember, this isn't just about passing an exam.
Right.
It's about giving yourself the tools to be a leader
Mm-hmm.
in a world that's facing these, huge environmental challenges.
That's a good point. It's about, looking at the bigger picture and understanding that the decisions we make today,
Mm-hmm.
they have consequences down the line.
Absolutely.
And, brings us back to Bhopal,
Yeah.
which is this really powerful reminder of what can happen when we don't prioritize safety and responsibility.
That's a lesson we can't forget.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, we've covered so much today, from the history of the Bhopal Gas Tragedy
Mm-hmm.
to, what's happening now with the waste disposal,
Yeah, all the different aspects.
to the policies that are shaping how we deal with these things.
The science, the regulations.
Yeah, technology, everything.
Deep ethical questions.
So we hope this deep dive has given you a good starting point
Yeah.
for, exploring this issue even further.
And don't forget to check out those articles we mentioned from the Hindustan Times and the BBC
Yes, great resources.
for more info.
And remember, the key to doing well on the UPSC, it's not just about knowing the facts. It's about analyzing them critically,
Yeah.
connecting them to those bigger ideas,
Presenting a clear perspective.
and never stop learning. Never stop asking questions, and always look for solutions.
That's the key.
Well, that's a wrap on another deep dive. If you found this helpful for your UPSC journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your fellow aspirants.
Spread the knowledge.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into something, equally fascinating and relevant.
Always something new to explore.
Until then, keep those brains buzzing.